Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. And this time, we're tackling something that I think we all know a little too well. That thing that keeps us up at night, that thing that makes us reach for the comfort food. It's stress, and we're diving deep.
Oh, absolutely. And we're not just skimming the surface here. We're going beyond those everyday, ooh, if I need a vacation feelings, and getting into the real nitty-gritty of the science behind it.
Exactly. Like, how does stress actually affect our bodies and our minds?
Hmm.
And, you know, do we all react the same way? Spoiler alert, we definitely don't.
Right. And to really unpack all of this, we've got some fascinating sources lined up, some serious academic research, even a study on how medical students' bodies completely freak out during exam week.
Oh, I can only imagine. I bet that's relatable for a lot of us, even if we're not cramming for med school finals.
For sure. But we've also got some real-life examples to keep things grounded and hopefully help you understand your own stress responses a little better. Maybe even come away with some tools to handle all those curveballs life throws your way.
That's the goal. So I'm already curious, is there like a universal stress language that our bodies speak when we're feeling the pressure?
You know, you could say that. Back in the 1930s, a scientist named Hans Selye, he really did a lot of the early work on stress. Anyway, he figured out that there's this three-stage process our bodies go through whenever we face any kind of stressor. He called it the General Adaptation Syndrome, or GAS for short. Think of it like your body's built-in alarm system.
Okay, 3 stages. I'm liking where this is going. So what happens in stage 1?
Okay, so stage one is the alarm stage. Imagine you're walking down a dark street and suddenly, bam, a huge dog appears out of nowhere.
Oh no, I'd be terrified.
Right. So what happens? Your heart starts pounding, you get that surge of adrenaline. That's the classic fight or flight response kicking in. It's our body's way of saying, hey, there's danger, time to react.
Okay, that makes sense. But we can't stay in fight or flight mode forever, right? What happens when that scary dog feeling doesn't disappear right away?
Well, you're right. You can't be sprinting on adrenaline all the time. That's where stage two comes in resistance. On the surface, you might think you're handling the stress. Maybe you're even pushing through it, telling yourself, I got this. But inside, it's a different story.
Yeah, I've definitely been there. Putting on a brave face while secretly feeling like I'm coming undone.
Exactly. And during this resistance stage, your body's working overtime behind the scenes, depleting all its energy reserves, burning through hormones like crazy just to keep up.
It's like running on fumes, even though we might not realize it.
Yes, a perfect analogy. And if that stress just keeps on going and going and going, well, then we enter the danger zone, stage three, exhaustion.
Uh-oh. Exhaustion doesn't sound good. What happens then?
This is where things can get tricky. Your immune system weakens, you're more susceptible to getting sick, and you're more at risk for chronic health problems down the line.
Wow, so stress really can take a toll on our bodies if it goes unchecked for too long. But I'm curious, what's actually happening inside us during these stages? Like, what's the science behind all those sweaty palms and racing thoughts?
Well, there are two key players here, two systems that are constantly working to keep us balanced. First up, we have the SAM pathway. Think of it as the first responder, all about that quick, adrenaline-fueled fight-or-flight reaction.
Okay, SAM pathway, got it. So that's what makes our hearts pound and I'm guessing makes us feel like we can't sit still.
You got it. And it's not just the heart rate. We're talking dilated pupils, changes in digestion, all sorts of things happening at once.
Oh, so that's why my stomach does flip-flops when I'm stressed. It all makes sense now. So SAM is like the quick response team. What about the other system you mentioned?
The other one is the HPA axis, the marathon runner of the stress response. It involves this whole chain reaction between your brain, your pituitary gland, and then those adrenal glands again. But this time, they're releasing a different hormone, cortisol.
Cortisol. I feel like I see that word everywhere these days. What's so special about it?
Well, cortisol is actually essential for making sure your body has the energy to deal with a stressful situation. It's our long-term stress manager, helping us cope when things just won't let up.
So it sounds like cortisol could be a good thing, in a way.
It is. In the short term, it helps us adapt and survive stressful situations. But here's the catch. When you're constantly stressed out and cortisol stays high for too long, it can actually start to work against you.
Oh no, backfire, how? Give us the scary details.
For one thing, high levels of cortisol can actually suppress your immune system, making you more susceptible to catching colds, getting infections, all that fun stuff. Remember that study about medical students getting sick during exam weeks? That's a classic example of cortisol doing its thing.
So it's not just in my head, stress really can make you physically more vulnerable. That's pretty wild.
It is, but I'm curious, do you think everyone reacts to stress in the same way? I mean, some people seem to just thrive under pressure, while others completely fall apart.
You're so right. I know people who get energized by deadlines and others who just melt down.
hmm
Why is that? Do our personalities play a role in how we handle stress?
You're on the right track. Personality is definitely part of the puzzle.
Okay, so is this where we bring in the classic type A versus type B personalities?
Bingo. Remember those personality tests? Type
Okay.
A, always rushing, super competitive, maybe a little bit quick to anger. In type B, more laid back, go with the flow, doesn't sweat the small stuff.
I can definitely think of some type A's and type B's in my life right now.
Eh,
But I'm curious, how do these personality types actually affect our ability to handle stress? Like, do type A's just explode when things get tough?
Not necessarily explode, but there's definitely a connection there. Back in the 1950s, two cardiologists, Friedman and Rosenman, they were studying heart disease, and they noticed something really interesting.
What did they find?
Well, a lot of their patients who had heart attacks, they shared some similar personality traits. They were ambitious, driven, worked long hours, and often had a bit of a short fuse. The classic type A personality.
Wait a minute, are you saying that being a type A could be bad for your heart?
Their research seemed to suggest a link, yes, but it's not quite as simple as type A equals heart attack. Later studies found that it's not just about being a type A, it's about how you manage those type A tendencies.
So there's hope for us type A's.
Absolutely. For example, some type A's who had heart attacks, they started making lifestyle changes, like learning to manage their anger, finding ways to relax, that sort of thing.
Makes sense. Taking care of yourself no matter what your personality type.
Exactly. And those who made those changes, they actually ended up doing better than those who didn't. So it seems like mindset and behavior play a huge role, not just our inherent personality type.
So even if you're wired to be a high-strung go-getter, there's still hope for managing stress and staying healthy. That's a relief. But I'm curious, are there other personality types that are particularly good at dealing with stress? Like, is there a stress-proof personality?
Well, there's no such thing as being completely stress-proof, but there is a fascinating concept called the hardy personality. It's all about building resilience to stress, and it might surprise you what it involves.
Hardy personality.
Okay.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What makes someone hardy?
Well, a psychologist named Suzanne Kobasa, she identified 3 key ingredients for this hardy personality. She called them the 3 C's: commitment, challenge, and control.
The 3 C's. I love it. Okay, let's break those down, starting with commitment. What's that all about?
Think about people who are really engaged in their lives. They have a strong sense of purpose, they find meaning in what they do. This deep sense of commitment helps them stay focused and motivated even when things get tough.
So it's not just about working hard, it's about having that bigger picture sense of meaning and purpose driving you.
Exactly. And then there's challenge. Hardy people, they don't see change and obstacles as threats. They actually see them as opportunities to learn and grow.
Wow, that's a pretty different way of looking at things. So instead of freaking out when things change, they just roll with it and actually see the positive.
You got it. Yeah. They use challenges to learn new skills, to expand their horizons, to become even stronger. And finally, we've got control, which is super important when it comes to stress.
Okay, control, tell me everything. That seems like the holy grail of stress management.
It really is key. Hardy individuals, they have this strong internal locus of control, meaning they believe they have the power to influence their own lives. They don't just sit back and let things happen to them. They take charge.
So they're not victims of circumstance. They believe they can make a difference.
Right. And this belief in their own agency, it gives them a sense of confidence. It helps them stay calm and collected, even when things get crazy around them. They don't get as easily thrown off balance.
I can see how those 3 C's, commitment, challenge, and control, they could really add up to a superpower when it comes to dealing with stress. But are there any real-life examples of this hardy personality in action? Like, does this stuff actually work outside of a textbook?
That's a great question. There's actually a fascinating study from 1987 by a researcher named Maddie. He was studying a group of managers at the Bell Telephone Company during a time of, massive reorganization. Talk about a high-stress situation, right?
Oh yeah, that sounds incredibly stressful. What happened to them?
Well, it was a tough time for everyone. 2/3 of the managers in the study ended up developing health problems. Their work suffered. Things were rough.
Oh wow. So the stress really got to them.
It did for many, but here's the amazing part. The remaining third of the managers, they actually thrived during all this chaos. Their health stayed strong, they were happier at work, they'd even felt more fulfilled than ever before.
What? How is that even possible? What were they doing differently?
Well, it turns out those who thrived, they scored really high on those measures of the three C's: commitment, challenge, and control. Those qualities actually helped them navigate that stressful period like champions.
So it's like those three C's acted as a buffer, a shield, against all the negative effects of that crazy work upheaval. I wonder if we can all learn to cultivate a little more of that hardiness in our own lives.
That's a great question. And it just so happens that we're going to be diving deeper into exactly that as we continue this deep dive. Stay tuned.
I can't wait. This is already blowing my mind. Okay, so we talked about these different stages of stress, right? And the systems that are involved, like the SAM pathway, the HPA axis, cortisol, the whole 9 yards. But let's get real for a minute. I mean, we all know that stress just feels awful. But what's the actual science behind its impact on our health? Like, does it actually do damage, or is it all in our heads?
It's definitely not just in your head. Stress can really mess with your physical well-being, especially if it's chronic, long-term stress. And one of the biggest things it affects is your immune system.
Oh, really? So, like, stress makes us get sick more easily.
Exactly. Remember how we talked about cortisol being released during stress? Well, in the short term, it's helpful, but when it's constantly high, it actually starts to weaken your immune defenses.
So too much cortisol is a bad thing.
It can be, yeah. Basically, cortisol can suppress the production of lymphocytes.
Lymphocytes. Remind me what those are again.
They're those white blood cells that fight off infections like your body's little soldiers.
Oh, right. So it's like stress is telling those soldiers to stand down, leaving us wide open to getting sick.
That's a good way to put it. And it's not just colds either. There's a connection between chronic stress and some pretty serious health issues.
Like what? Give me the scary details.
Well, one of the big ones is cardiovascular disease. We're talking about heart attacks, strokes, the serious stuff. It's not like stress causes these things overnight, but the long-term wear and tear it puts on your heart and blood vessels, that's definitely something to be aware of.
Okay, now I'm getting a little nervous. How exactly does stress affect our hearts? Like, can worrying about deadlines really put you at risk for a heart attack?
Well, think about it this way. When you're stressed out, those stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, they're constantly surging through your body, right? It's like your cardiovascular system is on high alert 24/7. And over time, that can create a few problems.
Okay, I'm listening. What kind of problems?
One thing is that those stress hormones can cause your blood vessels to constrict, which raises your blood pressure.
And high blood pressure is a major risk factor for heart disease.
Exactly. It's like driving your car with your foot on the gas pedal all the time. Eventually, something's got to give.
So stress is basically wearing down our arteries over time.
It's a good analogy.
Hmm.
Over time, that chronic stress, it can actually damage the lining of your arteries, making them more likely to develop plaque buildup. And as that plaque builds up, it narrows the artery.
And if an artery gets completely blocked, that's when you have a heart attack.
That's right. That's when the heart muscle doesn't get enough oxygen and starts to die. So, it's a serious situation. It really shows how important it is to manage stress, not just for your mental health, but for your physical health, too.
Absolutely. Stress is not something to take lightly. But, we've talked a lot about fight or flight and how it can be helpful sometimes. But I've also heard that there are other ways we react to stress. It's not always about fighting or running away, right?
That's right. The fight or flight model is a good starting point, but it doesn't capture the whole picture of how humans react to stress. For instance, have you ever heard of the freeze response?
Freeze, like a deer in headlights.
Exactly. It's a primal response. It can happen when we feel completely overwhelmed, like there's no escape. Instead of fighting or fleeing, we basically shut down.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that feeling. It's like your brain just goes offline.
That's the freeze response. It often happens automatically, not a conscious choice. And it's important to remember that stress responses, they can vary between genders, too.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So men and women react to stress differently.
There's some evidence to suggest that, yeah. Back in 2006, Shelley Taylor, she's a researcher, she proposed something called the tend and befriend theory. Her research found that women, when they're stressed, are more likely to seek out social support.
That makes sense. I know a lot of women who, when they're stressed, they call a friend or spend time with family.
It's a way of coping by strengthening those social bonds and nurturing others. It's a powerful way to build resilience.
It definitely sounds healthier than constantly being in fight or flight mode. So we're seeing that there are different ways to respond to stress, and it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Here's something I've been wondering about. The stressors we face today, they're so different from what our ancestors had to deal with. Does that affect how our bodies handle stress?
That's a great point. Our ancestors, they were dealing with immediate threats like wild animals or natural disasters, life or death situations. Those acute stressors, they triggered the fight or flight response, and once the threat was gone, the stress response subsided.
But our stressors today are different.
So different. Now, we have work deadlines, financial worries, relationship problems. These things don't just go away in an instant, right? They're ongoing.
So we're basically living with this low-grade stress buzzing in the background all the time.
Exactly. It's a mismatch, you see. Our bodies are still wired for those fight or flight situations, but the stressors we're facing now, they're often chronic, long-term issues. It's like having that car alarm blaring constantly, even though there's no danger. It wears us down, it depletes our resources.
So you're saying our stress response, which was designed to help us survive, can actually backfire in modern life.
It's kind of a paradox, right? And it shows just how crucial it is to understand how stress affects us and to find healthy ways to manage it. Luckily, there are things we can do to rewire our responses and become more resilient.
Okay, now you're talking. That's what I want to hear about. What can we do to manage all this stress?
Well, that's a conversation for our next segment. Stay tuned.
All right, I'm ready for part 3. Let's talk solutions. Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's been a lot to take in, but I feel like I've learned so much already about how stress works and how it can affect us.
It's true. We've really gone deep. But the good news is that once you understand how stress works, you can start to manage it more effectively.
That's what I was hoping to hear.
Huh.
So where do we go from here? What are some practical things our listeners can do to, navigate those inevitable stress storms in their own lives?
Well, I think the first step is recognizing your own unique stress response. Do you tend to go into fight or flight mode? Do you freeze up? Or do you lean towards tend and befriend?
Right. It's like figuring out your own stress personality, right?
Exactly. And once you know your pattern, you can start to develop coping strategies that work best for you.
It's like knowing your enemy.
Right.
You can come up with a game plan. So what kind of strategies are we talking about? What actually works?
Well, remember those 3 C's of hardiness we talked about? Commitment, challenge, and control.
Oh, yeah. Those were good.
They really are powerful. Cultivating a strong sense of purpose in your life, embracing challenges as opportunities for growth, and believing in your ability to influence your circumstances, those things can make a huge difference in how you experience and manage stress.
It's about building that inner resilience.
Yeah.
Right? Not letting stress just take over.
Exactly. Now, for those type A personalities out there, always on the go, striving for achievement, learning to manage anger and frustration is key.
Type A has always got to be moving and shaking.
Right. But sometimes that can lead to, getting overwhelmed or frustrated easily. So learning to hit that pause button before reacting impulsively is so important.
Easier said than done sometimes. Any tips for actually doing that?
Well, things like deep breathing exercises or meditation can be incredibly helpful. Even just taking a few minutes to step away from a stressful situation and clear your head.
I love that. Just creating a little space between the trigger and the reaction.
Right. You learn to take a breath and choose a more mindful response instead of just, automatically reacting. And don't forget about the power of social support.
Oh, yeah. Talking it out can be so helpful.
Absolutely. Talking to a trusted friend, a family member, or even a therapist, it can help you process your emotions, gain perspective, and realize that you're not alone in this.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders reminding you that you've got this. I love that.
We all need that support sometimes. So, we've learned that stress is complicated, but it's not invincible. We can learn to manage it effectively.
It's been such a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of stress, and most importantly, how to actually deal with it in a healthy way. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. And to our listeners, remember, you have the power to manage stress and live a healthier, happier life. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep taking care of yourselves.
That's a great note to end on. Until next time, everyone.